Hello, and welcome back to the Physiology of Singing, 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 yeah. And this is Pharyngeal Muscles, okay? So vocal tract, essentially part one, like post-intro. We're gonna work our way up. We're gonna be like, so we just did larynx stuff, and then I did acoustic stuff, and now we're going to be like muscles up in here. Then I'm going to stop around the soft palate and talk about that a bit, and mask resonance, if you're looking for that. That's going to be probably more around the soft palate time. And then we're going to talk about like oral stuff, and especially tongue. Tongue's going to come up, though. Like, tongue is probably going to be throughout all three of these videos, because tongue is a wily little muscle, well, group of muscles. You know, it's a wily thing, especially for singers, right? We all talk about our tongue. Tongue tension, tongue. Right? It's like how many of us backstage, like, we're just like stretching out our tongue, you know? And doing like little stuff to like loosen it up. Right? So that's going to be its own video, but it also might be kind of a theme throughout these. So, bringing up my textbook again. So this is once again the preclinical speech science textbook that I used in my master's program at University of Arizona. And I took the class of the same title with Jenny Hoyt, Dr. Hoyt, as you see down there. So, let's talk about it. There's some really nice images here. So I'm gonna start out by talking about the constrictor muscles in the pharynx, and here's what they pretty much look like. So, let's see if I can actually point correctly at things. So this is, I believe, back view of the throat. So just looking directly back in, like, you know, like no spine, right? Just like in front of the spine. So some of this, like if you see where these are attaching, that probably is actually, I believe they do attach to cervical vertebra. I'm pretty sure they do. So there's not a whole lot of room back there for them to attach to anything. So the spine would be in front of this if you had the spine in this picture. So there's an inferior constrictor down here, there's a middle constrictor up there, and there's a superior right here. Crazy hard, right? And what do? They constrict your throat, essentially. They close off the airway. This is like where, you know, you think physiology and anatomy is going to be like super tricky, and then they give you like muscles where you're like, it's just the superior, middle, and inferior constrictor, and that's all you have to know. And what they do is in their name, and then you take a test on that, and you're like, thank God for the constrictor muscles, because I know those. Compared to these other ones, like the salpingopharyngeus. Okay, gotta remember that one. Anyway, total side note, if there's any speech students out there ever watching these, my little mnemonic for the salpingopharyngeus is, it's just singing the word. I just do like salpingopharyngeus. I don't know why that made me remember it really easily. Salpingopharyngeus. It's the salpingopharyngeus. I don't know. So, use that if you want. If that's the one, I kept forgetting that one. Anyway, for tests. Okay, so here's the side view over here. And this little white guy right here, oop, I got a glare. That is the hyoid bone, okay? And this would be the thyroid cartilage underneath it, kind of beside my finger. I can't quite, sorry, I'm not seeing very well. There we go. So there's the thyroid cartilage. So this is your larynx right here, okay? So the inferior constrictor, you can see, comes all the way down to the larynx, essentially, right behind it, really. And the inferior constrictor is really kind of made up of two parts, because one part of it is essentially the opening into the esophagus, so which I believe is what's shown here, down at the very bottom here. So the part that is the opening to the esophagus, it is tonically closed, which means it is at rest, meaning like when the muscle is just hanging out, like its normal state is actually contracted. It's closed all the time. It just stays closed. And then when you go to swallow, you know, the larynx moves up and out of the way, and that triggers that muscle to release, to not be so contracted, to not constrict, and then that allows food and stuff to go in the food tube instead of the air tube, because nobody wants it in their lungs. It's not good stuff. And then this is the middle constrictor right here, and then here's the superior constrictor right here, okay? So, like I said, these muscles constrict. They close off the throat. They do like kind of a circular, like, closing off. They are the most active when you are swallowing, at the point where you've pushed the food or liquid to the back of your mouth, and then your actual official swallow has been triggered. Your constrictor muscles play a big role in that. And so if you're ever looking into literature on what those muscles do or how they function, you're probably going to find it scientifically in swallow literature. It's something that therapists are very interested in. Some voice therapists do also specialize in swallowing, and a lot of the researchers kind of overlap with swallowing because they know the anatomy and the physiology pretty well. But it ends up being important because basically it's to keep people healthy, to keep things out of their lungs so they don't get pneumonia, essentially. But if somebody's had a stroke, or if they have a neurological condition, if maybe they've had a lot of chemotherapy, or perhaps some neck radiation, or even just cervical surgery, right? Like cervical spine, like anterior cervical stuff, like if they have to get in there with infused plates and stuff, that can damage some of the nerves, essentially, that feeds these muscles. And so the constrictors can become a little less able to constrict, okay? And so the way it works is, okay, so this hand's going to be probably like the liquid or food. We call it the bolus. That's just easy. We could just call it bolus. So after you've chewed it all up and you've pushed it to the back of your mouth, we call it a bolus, okay? It's back there. And so what the constrictors do is they create literally like a tight closure in front of like below it, right below it. And then they just kind of keep on, they just sort of wave into this contracting as it goes down with gravity. So what that does is it helps us to drive the food into the food tube, into your esophagus, a lot faster than just gravity, because you're creating negative pressure in front of that bolus, in front of that liquid or food, and there's high pressure behind that opening. So what it actually is, if you want to think of it this way, it's like when you let air out of a balloon, right? When you're like, right? When you do that like high pitched, I wish I had a balloon, but anyway, when you do that like high pitched, letting the air out really slow of a balloon, right? That's essentially what your constrictor muscles are doing underneath what you're swallowing. And so you can kind of imagine that like moving down, and then it essentially directs the food, you know, it helps to like move that food quickly into the, you know, past the inferior constrictor and into the esophagus. So if that constriction gets weaker, like on a balloon, okay, so if your balloon constriction gets a little more open and it's like, right, what happens to that is water, particularly like liquids, that move really fast and that kind of get everywhere, right? Like if you spill water, it goes everywhere, right? And then you go, oh, it's just water, don't worry about it. Phew, because if it's wine or something, you're like, no, right? So those kind of liquids can easily go into the airway for patients if they don't have enough of a closure. So essentially, if their little balloon opening is a little too wide, then that liquid is going to sink, right? It's going to sort of slip right through, and it's going to get down a lot faster than you really want it to because of gravity, and it's probably going to get into the airway, and then it's not so great. So that's what we do with swallowing. Is that important to singers? Not necessarily. Am I including this on here? Yes. Why? Because you guys are all people, and you might even have relatives that have swallow stuff, and you might have maybe your grandparent or one day your parents, you know, or somebody. You might need to see a therapist or a voice therapist or an ENT about swallowing. They might get a referral for something like that to look at their swallowing, and you might be like, what? What is this swallowing stuff? That's their domain. That's what they do. But the other thing I want to bring it up to you about for singers is because I think when, especially when people are going for a dark sound, when they're going for that oscuro kind of sound, they're going for something kind of dark, you know. A lot of times, you know, I've been given the cue, like, open your throat. Like, think of opening your throat, or, you know, just make it really dark or whatever, okay? And opening the throat was always confusing to me when I was coming off my paresis, because I always felt the sensation of some sort of activation happening in my throat because I was really tight. And so when someone said open my throat, I always thought of it as like this active thing I need to be doing. Like I have to do something to open it. Like it's not normally open. And that's not necessarily true. Like if you're just hanging out there on your couch, breathing in and out, your pharynx, your little airway back there is probably decently open. You know what I mean? Like air's getting in and out. That's what it needs to do, right? So you do have some muscles that help to open up the pharynx, but they're usually in response to muscles that either move the larynx up, that help move that up, or that help close off the pharynx, one of the two, because muscles tend to come in pairs, right? So there's usually something that will help with the relaxation part after something is constricted. So, or activated. There's usually like the antagonist muscle. Okay, so you do have that. It's usually for the sides of the pharynx. These sides get pushed in by different muscles, mostly just to like close that gap off really easily. The front of your pharynx, good for singers to know, is the root of your tongue. Okay, so the very, very front is tongue. And so tongue is also involved. Root of tongue is involved with the swallowing too. But the tongue, that root of the tongue can definitely hit the back of the pharynx pretty easily. So to help close off the sides while you're swallowing, you do have some other muscles. And they're conveniently located down here. Whoa, let me get to where I can see, and I can see what I'm doing here, hopefully. Okay. All right, so they're over here. Okay, so this is the tongue right here. This is the front of your throat. Essentially, this is the root of the tongue, okay? That's the epiglottis cartilage down there, okay? So this long muscle here, that's the salpingopharyngeus. Salpingopharyngeus is right there, that nice long one up and down. And then you also have your palatopharyngeus here, which helps, it's one of the muscles of the soft palate, which I'm going to get to in a bit there, right there. But this palatopharyngeus, you notice it's like soft palate area up here, but on the side, you're getting down into the pharynx down here. So it helps, the palatopharyngeus actually helps to close off the sides of your pharynx when you're swallowing and when you want to close it. And the salpingopharyngeus, I believe, is one of the muscles that helps to open up the sides of the pharynx. I think that's right, or maybe it's the stylo. Oh, you know what? Salpingopharyngeus might close it off too. Yeah, salpingopharyngeus closes off. Sorry, salpingopharyngeus closes because it's stylopharyngeus. I was confusing it. It's this guy, stylopharyngeus. This guy helps to open up. Isn't that, like, he looks so tiny, but it's coming from the styloid process over here and just kind of coursing itself kind of through and into, I think it goes, where does it attach? Somewhere in the larynx, I believe. So, sorry, I probably should have reviewed this beforehand. That would have been good. Let's see, stylopharyngeus, styloid process of temporal bone, runs downward, forward, and toward the midline. Okay, so yeah, so that one actually helps to open up the lateral walls if something has contracted and now is releasing. So it helps it to get more open quickly. Now, you can have these muscles, sorry, my shirt's all crazy. You can have these constrictors and the ones that close off laterally, those muscles. They can be active while you're singing. I mean, I'm sure they can be. People use them to articulate in certain languages, actually. So languages that have more of those like really guttural, like I can't really do a pharyngeal, a pharyngeal stop. But there are languages that have those sounds in them, and then there's also clinical populations like children with cleft palates. Sometimes to create like a p or a t is really hard for them because a lot of the air goes out their nose because they have a hole where their palate should be. They have a bit of a hole there. And so they'll sometimes create those stop consonants where they have to stop the air and then burst out the air. They'll do that in their throat with their pharyngeal constrictors and these lateral, the ones that like the salpingopharyngeus and palatopharyngeus. They'll close it off that way. So it's interesting to hear. But so yeah, they can definitely be active with articulating. In Romance, and I believe most Romance languages, I'm pretty sure all Romance languages, but I'm not 100% on that. And in English and in German, you don't really have consonants that are produced in the pharynx. You have velar consonants, like soft palate area, but not lower, not like further down, right? So singers, typically, we don't need to use these muscles very much in terms of articulation. We don't have to worry about that. But the main takeaway, finally getting to the takeaway, is that when your throat is open back there, when your pharynx is open, you're probably not going to perceive any actual activation back there. I mean, yeah, you have a muscle, you have that tiny little one, the stylopharyngeus. It's going to like help open up the lateral parts of the pharynx. But you know, even if you're getting a little extra opening there, you're probably not going to get a huge perception of a much larger throat. So instead of opening kind of, if you're looking down into it, instead of opening more this way, I like to think more opening lengthwise, more of like I'm going to gain some length by taking a really deep breath, getting those connective tissues to help lower that larynx a little. I think of it as a tall back there, being very, very tall rather than being open this way, or even to me, for me, this works for some people. Some people think really back, like soft palate. They think really back like that, like this is their, you know, if this is their soft palate back there, they go when they breathe in. And that's great if it works for you. It didn't work for me personally because what I tended to do is pull the root of the tongue back as well. So when I think back, I would go, and then my tongue would be back there like that. And that's not the best because I can't even, my diction won't be clear now because the root of my tongue is pulling back. And yeah, you can have a dark sound, but if you have some constriction in your pharynx, I think a lot of that sound to what it means to singers is kind of that masked, like overly masked sound, right? Like the kind of muffled, like they're singing through like a sock, like they're kind of kind of sound. Because it's that dark sound like this, but you don't have a lot of chiaro in it, and so it can't really carry. So it might sound really pretty on a recording, and it might sound really pretty in a small room, but when it comes to like getting a paycheck to like project over an orchestra, it's not going to happen with that sound. So, yeah, so that's one of the things. And then that might be the kind of sound where a teacher might be like, this is root of the tongue, it's root of the tongue. Maybe. There's a possibility it could be constrictors. I don't know. Maybe. But point being, if anyone gives you any sort of cue about like root of the tongue sounds pulled back or sounds tight, or they hear that sounds like things are a little too dark back there, like too dark, overly dark, they're probably talking about the pharynx needs to be a little more open, which actually means you probably need to do less back there. So don't think of opening the pharynx as an active thing. Think of it more like you're releasing tension and you're removing the feeling of doing something in your throat to actually have that open throat that the coaches and voice teachers are telling you about. So I think that's the biggest takeaway. So pharyngeal muscles, most of them close it off for swallowing purposes. So if you need to open your throat, instead of it being an active opening, it needs to become like a neutral feeling, like you're sitting around breathing. Okay? And if you want to gain more dark sound, you need to probably have a longer vocal tract to have lower resonances. You're going to resonate lower frequencies in your harmonic spectrum, going to give you a darker sound, but you can do that with the deep, deep, deep breath, and that helps to relax the larynx lower a little because these passive connections that go into the upper ribs and the clavicle will start to release downward, okay, because you take those nice low, deep, everything's raw kind of breaths, raw, okay? You take one of those inhalations, and then you're going to have some length back there. And you're going to have some nice oscuro without the sensation of something happening in your throat. So, as annoying as it is when you hear those famous singers talk about, I don't feel anything in my throat. When my throat's really open, I don't feel anything. And I know as a student, you're just like, how do you not feel anything? You know? But that's actually what they mean, is like, for reals, most of the muscles in your throat and even in the upper part of your larynx, if you have a sensation of them closing or you have a sensation of those muscles doing something actively, it's probably too much activation. There's probably too much muscle activation. You actually need to think of a way to release those muscles back there while still allowing, good diction to happen and still allowing, nice vocal production to happen, right? So it's about, once again, finding where it's easier to produce the sound while still taking a sufficient breath and blah, blah, blah. It's complicated enough, right? But just so you know, opening the throat, not really an active thing per se. Technically, sure, it's possible you have a little something helping you to open it up. But as far as your sensation of what's going on back there, you're probably not going to feel much going on if you actually have an open throat. Because you're not swallowing, hopefully. Yeah. So, all right. So I think I'll try to tackle the soft palate. I'm really going to try to do that hopefully this weekend. I really will need to review a little, I think, before I start tackling it, though. Just to make sure I'm talking about some accurate stuff for you guys. Keep my info as accurate as I can anyway. So, yes, go forth and release those constrictor muscles. And release that root of the tongue. Don't actively open your throat. Just let it be open. Allow it to be open rather than actively opening it. And I don't know, I just found a pin on my couch randomly. So, yay! Guess that's useful. Okay. All right, well, I'll see you guys next time, where hopefully I can demystify the soft palate. Demystify, woo, the soft palate. All right, see you guys next time. Bye!